Today on the stream, should real-life events be used in video games? How you react to that question will really influence how you watch today's show. We are going to be looking at a controversial video game that's based on a very controversial war. Take a look at 6 Days in Fallujah.
6 Days in Fallujah is based on the Second Battle of Fallujah in 2004, widely regarded as the U.S.'s toughest urban battle since Vietnam.
Red 1, Raider 1.
They still battling for control of the state.
Thousands of American, British and Iraqi troops are reported tonight to have begun a new offensive south of Baghdad, opening a new front after the fighting in Fallujah.
You know, there are games that are based on the parody of reality, or games that are based on artificial cities. But this game itself is based on a true conflict that occurred in the world, and people died due to it. You know, many families were displaced due to it, as well as soldiers that came back from it with incredible levels of PTSD. So this is not a game. You know, our hashtag is Iraq is not a video game. This shouldn't exist. And it shouldn't be something that people play to trivialize a real life event. It's a toxic imperialist perspective that has continued and been present in media for as long as I've lived, and we've had enough.
Nobody and nothing else matters. Not the flag, not our families or fellow Americans back home. Not a fictional hunt for weapons of mass destruction. Not the Iraqi people. And surely not the politicians who sent us to war.
Dubbed as an Arab murder simulator by critics and a playable documentary by its creators and supporters, 6 Days in Fallujah isn't just your average war game. It recreates one of the bloodiest battles of the Iraq War, and modern war for that matter, and now with its 2021 revival, it's forcing gamers and critics to ask, when does realism in gaming become exploitation? And is it ever okay to turn a real-life battle with such a high caliber of both civilian deaths and allegations of US war crimes into entertainment? With the recreation of the Second Battle of Fallujah, one of the bloodiest urban conflicts of modern history, a battle so brutal it's been debated for over 2 decades, the developers of 6 Days in Fallujah claim their goal is to show how soldiers fought with the dangers of door-to-door combat without killing civilians. But that raises a profound question. How do you honor a battle overshadowed by accusations of American war crimes by turning it into a product you can buy and play? This is the story of a game so controversial it was cancelled for over a decade and thought by many to be dead, only to claw its way back from the dead in 2021. Its revival has forced the gaming world and also normal people to confront an uncomfortable question. Where do we draw the line between authentic realism and artistic freedom versus pure exploitation? But we can't just launch into the video and talk about how controversial is the game without looking at the historical events that make the game itself so divisive. So we have to look back at what happened in Fallujah, and we were probably all kids back then. So in 2003, the United States invaded Iraq, claiming it had WMDs or weapons of mass destruction, which later claimed to be false. They destabilized the country, and it sparked massive anti-American sentiment across the region. By November 2004, Fallujah in Iraq's Al-Anbar province had become an insurgent stronghold, controlled by groups like Al-Qaeda in Iraq, the Islamic Army of Iraq, and the Army of the Mujahideen. The US and allied forces launched Operation Phantom Fury, the Second Battle of Fallujah, to crush the insurgency and assert control for the new American-friendly Iraqi government. The entire war for that matter, was viewed as excessive force/violence that did not need to happen. America is viewed as not having needed to invade Iraq in the first place, nor staying around continuing the problems they created. For roughly 6 weeks, Marines, many from the 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, fought house to house and room to room against an entrenched army force that had ample time to prepare, including groups like Al-Qaeda as mentioned previously. It was the most intense urban combat US forces had faced since the Vietnam War.
The person who goes in first is never wrong. They have the most to fear.
And as soon as I walk in, I see a machine gun right in front of my face, maybe 10 feet, 15 feet from me.
Every time we would go into one of those buildings, you never know what to expect.
You don't know the layout of the house until you get in there. And then you still don't know it until you go all the way through it.
Room clearing, house clearing, it's different every single time.
For any leader, when you're in the highest levels of combat, the paradox that exists is you have a mission. The mission comes before the Marines. The Marines are the thing that you love. You have to sacrifice, you have to destroy what you love in service of the mission.
Everywhere you look, there has to be somebody watching, because that's potentially where you can get hit from.
We have to clear every house, every building. We just went house to house.
Initially, you're trained to stack outside the room in teams of 4, to breach and make entry. In practicality, this wasn't so simple.
The point man, he's the first one to die. As soon as you go through that door, there's a machine gun pointing right at your face.
The buildings that would have been used for everyday life, such as mosques, shops, were turned into deadly micro battlegrounds. The human cost was staggering. Fewer than 100 US troops died, but hundreds were wounded. But even worse, for Fallujah's residents, the toll was catastrophic. The Red Cross estimated 800 civilian deaths, but local NGOs and reports like those in The Guardian suggest up to 6,000, mostly civilians, were killed. Thousands were displaced, and the city was reduced to rubble. This wasn't a clean fight, it was a chaotic, brutal siege. Jeff Engelhardt, a former soldier with the 3rd Brigade, 1st Infantry Division, said in the 2005 documentary of Fallujah, The Hidden Massacre, "We were going into Fallujah that every single person that was walking, talking and breathing was an enemy combatant. As such, every single person was a target." The US military confirmed using white phosphorus as well, and it's an incendiary weapon that burns skin to the bone. While it's permitted as a smokescreen, its use against people in dense urban areas especially violates the Chemical Weapons Convention and has been called a potential war crime by many. Over 300 bombs, 6,000 artillery rounds, and 29,000 mortar were used per the US Marines. Former Marine Ross Caputi with the 1st Battalion 8th Marines recalled tactics like firing grenades into homes before entering to clear them, later learning that hundreds of civilians were still hiding in those homes. He told CNN, "The hardship that Phantom Fury imposed on Fallujahans and the destruction it caused made me really feel ashamed of what we were doing." And civilian accounts are harrowing. Journalist Ali Fadl's documentary Fallujah, The Real Story, showed a housewife's mirror with a message written in lipstick by US troops, with the writing "Fuck Iraq" and every Iraqi in it. Documentaries like 500 Miles to Babylon allege snipers targeted ambulances. And this is further supported, not with sniper, but this is in fact is actually kind of crazy, this next part. Former Representative Duncan Hunter bragged on a podcast about likely killing civilians, including women and children, with mortar fire. A 2014 Baghdad study found that over 80% of participants had PTSD from war trauma, and hospitals had reported spikes in birth defects and cancer, possibly linked to depleted uranium. For some of the Marines, Fallujah is a mythic chapter they look upon. For Iraqis and other Marines, it's a symbol of loss, and this grim reality is what a team of developers choose to turn into a video game. 6 Days was first announced way back in 2009 by Atomic Games and Konami. For those who remember, this was hot off the heels of 2007, when Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare had truly made its name and was there to stay, and the market was being flooded with quite a few war-themed games. But unlike the fictional events in most war games, though they may have been in the context of a real-world conflict, this was different. The 6 Days in Fallujah began its journey shortly after the battle, upon which the idea was conceived by Sergeant Eddie Garcia, a Marine wounded in the battle who envisioned a new way of play. One could call it a sort of interactive documentary. It was publicly announced in 2009 when Peter Tamt, then the head of Atomic Games, picked the project up alongside the game's original publisher, Konami. It was a bold move at a time when the global war on terrorism continued to rage on. Atomic, known for the Close Combat series, collaborated with over 100 Marines, soldiers and 28 Iraqi civilians, including 24 from Fallujah, to capture first-hand accounts. Harkening back to the original Rainbow Six, Ghost Recon, Brother in Arms, SOCOM and other classic squad-based shooters, players would use sophisticated military maneuvers to overcome simulated real-world events from the battle. They plan to feature documentary segments with interviews from the real people who were there, aiming for a level of respect they felt was absent from other franchises. They used thousands of photos, videos, and surplus military gear for authenticity, building a custom engine for destructible environments and satellite imagery to recreate Fallujah. The pitch was philosophical. Unlike films, which kept you at a distance, the game could place you in a soldier's boots, forcing split-second life or death decisions to build empathy. It was about the deadly struggle to survive. However, unsurprisingly, the announcement sparked immediate outrage. Right-wing groups, military families, and media like Fox News called it too soon and too realistic, as the Iraq War was still ongoing. Anti-war groups including the Stop War Coalition and the Council on American Islamic Relations (KAIR) condemned it as an Arab murder simulator. The main source of the initial controversy stemmed from veterans and anti-war groups alike, those who opposed the game for several reasons. One of the main reasons for this opposition was that the Second of Fallujah was a bloody affair, which saw the loss of many lives through its 6-day duration. People felt as though it was bad taste to release a recreation of one of the deadliest conflicts from the Iraq War, especially with a realistical tactical shooter slant on it, like the direction the developers were and are taking the title in. A core aspect of the controversy also regards questions over how authentically the game would portray the events of the Second Battle. The battle is known to have been serious with the loss of life as mentioned previously, and there's been renewed questions regarding how accurate the portrayal of it will be. As mentioned previously with the United States military usage of white phosphorus in Fallujah directly against citizens. Furthermore, the game was set to feature Al-Qaeda as enemy combatants, which obfuscates the situation based on facts such as men of a certain age not being allowed to evacuate. But things didn't get too far. Konami's vice president of marketing, Anthony Krautz, told the LA Times they pulled out after 3 weeks due to the flood of critical calls and emails. Atomic couldn't find a new publisher, faced layoffs, and went bankrupt. By 2010, despite claims that the game was actually finished, it was considered cancelled. In 2021 though, the Highwire Games in Victoria, led by none other by the former Atomic CEO Peter Tamp, revived the project, shifting from third-person to first-person gameplay. With talents like ex-Bungie composer Marty O'Donnell and former Destiny developers, the game promised polish, but the controversies once again roared back again. Critics like Arab game developer Rami Ismail called it a pro-American propaganda that risks normalizing war crimes. A Change.org petition, backed by a Gotham Knights developer, Osama Dorius, demanded cancellation, citing fears of Islamophobia and violence. The revival forced reckoning. Could a game respectfully depict such a painful event, or was it doomed, as mentioned previously also, to exploit it? 6 Days of Fallujah launched in early access on Steam in June 2023 for $40, or I should say $39.99, and its most touted feature is its procedural architecture. This is a system that randomly generates building interiors each time you play. Now to me this sounds very cool, and as the narrator in the marketing video says, Marines and soldiers never knew what was waiting for them behind the door, and if you want a realistic experience, neither can you. The developers say this was inspired by the Marines' accounts of terrifying uncertainty. The game gets small details right. Marines aimed over rear sights, dim flashlights from 2004, and amphibious vehicles with MRE boxes and toilet paper. Highwire provided Military Times with review copies, and veterans who played it praised its authenticity. However, there is something sort of extra noxious to program a machine specifically to recreate the homes of real people for the purpose of entertaining plays, even though you might want to show how drastic and how deadly it was. Meant for safety and family, such as the plastic chairs, the railings, the homes of Fallujans, they turn into battlegrounds. The developers have added civilians, and the shooting one triggers a fail state, the mission ends. They've said this, they'll do mission from the aspects of the Fallujah civilians, but so far from my knowledge, only there's 2 story campaign missions and 8 procedural co-op missions, and none are from the Iraqi civilians' perspective. It seems like that has taken a back seat for now. However, bringing up 2019's COD Modern Warfare, I want to bring something up here. Now, though this game was full of American propaganda pinning a war crime like the Highway of Death that Americans actually did on Russia in the game, on the fictional country Kyrgyzstan, I think. So basically they pinned it on Russia, but that's not what I want to focus on. They managed to do a fantastic job, and now this fantastic job was the escape with Farah. when she was escaping her home with her brother, crawling about, crouching, dodging soldiers, dogs, and poisonous gas. Now, this was such an extremely tense experience, and every time I play it, I remember the first time that how scared I was when I was actually playing it, and it still is. And whether 6 Days of Fallujah can do something similar or even better remains to be seen, but hopefully they do something like that, because I felt like that really put you in the boots or the shoes of a civilian, and it was frankly terrifying. The aspect I just want to touch briefly upon is, as someone who comes from a Muslim culture and background, hearing Allahu Akbar from the enemy team is complicated. I mean, it literally translates to God is great, but here it's used to signify degenerate terrorism, and it's a stark reminder of how good things can be twisted for terrible reasons. If the developers weren't so vocal in marketing this game as if it was some sort of hyper-realistic truth untold that we didn't know about, take on what really happened during the Iraq War, it wouldn't be getting nearly as much flack as it's currently getting. In-game, you cannot play as an insurgent, only a Marine, and mentioned on 6 Days' website, players will assume the role of an unarmed Iraqi father trying to get his family out of the city during certain missions. However, as mentioned previously, all the missions in early access have been all from a Marine's perspective. This can automatically lead to a sense of empathy for the Marines. You're putting yourself in their virtual shoes. This doesn't necessarily mean it's propaganda in favor of the invasions or the overall war on terror, but for some people it understandably leaves a bad taste in their mouth. Peter Tamt has gone on record and said, "I don't think we need to portray the atrocities in order for people to understand the human cost." However, by preventing players from using white phosphorus, though you can use it and it's not an accessible weapon to use, or committing the war crime, is the game sanitizing history? One could argue it's a cleaned up pro-American version of events. This is the same issue that got Modern Warfare 2019 in trouble when it rewrote the real-life Highway of Death war crime, which was committed by the US, British forces, French and Canadians, and that it was attributed to Russia. You might think Call of Duty, Battlefield, Ghost Recon and Medal of Honor get a free pass, and it's not that those games get a free pass, it's more so that outside of the titles in those series that are based in World War II, they are almost all entirely based on fictional storylines. The only reason why it's always been easy to make games based on World War II is because the idea of fighting Nazis is an agreeable evil to fight against. The same can't be said for virtually any modern game that came thereafter. It's the same reason why, outside of something as superficial as COD, we don't have a lot of games based in Vietnam, because history pretty unanimously acknowledges that it was an ill-fated war where the US pretty blatantly stood as lone aggressors. While I enjoy FPS and other war games, I do believe they often promote American sentiment. I can understand how a game where you can play as Marines invading Fallujah would be seen as promoting American sentiment in a similar respect. A major aspect of historically accurate war games is how it frames the player. Generally, when you pick up the controller, you're deciding to generally fight the good fight. You're choosing to fight the Nazis on Normandy. Generally, America has drawn conflicts on the sides they want to support. The choice being presented to the player is to participate in a conflict that the USA did not need to participate in. Choosing to engage in an unnecessary conflict as games come off kinda sketchy. It's not just the war in Iraq. I think other real-life invasions that shouldn't be turned into games. Sure, you could probably make a games about Japan invading Manchuria with horrors like Unit 731 or Germany blitzing England, but these would be considered distasteful, and I think it's even more distasteful when it's in a recent event. And even though it's only been about 20 years since the Second Battle of Fallujah, it still remains fresh in a lot of people's minds. Now, at the heart of the accusations of the game being a war crime simulator is whether creating 6 Days in Fallujah was a moral misstep in itself. The Iraq War had saw the killing of 100,000 civilians and displaced millions. It's offensive to some because it turns the deaths involved into entertainment for the nation that were the invaders. Video games are a part of pop culture, and the game's existence implies to some that America has genuinely failed to learn from the war. Najla Basim Abdullah, an Iraqi survivor in Atlanta, told CNN, "I am disgusted that something that will be producing profit when people like me suffer the consequences of this war. I will have to watch people play it for fun. I just can't get past the inhumanity." Hussein, a 26-year-old Iraqi with PTSD, said, "It dehumanizes Iraqi people, showing how some are insurgents, some are Al-Qaeda, some are civilians, with no way of differentiating them. it desensitizes this generation to this kind of violence against our people. CAIR and Veterans for Peace called for its cancellation, labeling it a game that glorifies violence and justifies the illegal invasion. Fans and supporters of the game counter that it's a form of artistic freedom, a playable documentary to share authentic stories. Peter Tamp told CNN, "We want players to get to know these people as real human beings rather than just avatars." Look, if you want to know my true thoughts on this, I don't agree with the calls to cancel or ban the game before it's actually fully released. I think we should see what the developers ultimately want to do with it and what they do with it. Like, if the final game leaves me drained emotionally, I'll consider it a great game. But if this is just another like military shooter like Call of Duty that serves up to like promote American propaganda, then it's a failure in my opinion. Artistic freedom, I think, should generally be upheld. Developers should have the right to tackle sensitive topics like the Iraq War, even if the execution might be messy or controversial. And then the game's billed as a sort of documentary, a playable documentary built with input from the Marines who were there, which gives it some legitimacy to tell a story from their perspective. If it's done thoughtfully, I think it could offer insight into a proper event that happened in history, much like how films and books have done that. That said, there's all the concerns about being pro-US propaganda or trivializing the suffering of Iraqis didn't come from nowhere, then they aren't baseless. All games can oversimplify complex conflicts, and if the game glosses over the atrocities or paints a one-sided picture, it risks being irresponsible. And then there's a reason to criticize it post-release, not to ban it though. Calling for cancellation before playing it feels like just jumping the gun. Nobody's played it yet, so how do we know it's going to actually normalize war crimes until we actually see it? Plus, the fear that it'll breed racism or violence, it doesn't hold up. I've seen a few people saying that. There's a few arguments because we've had quite like 10 years of research and studies done by all these like small fringe universities. We're talking about big universities like Oxford, and it shows no clear link between video games and real-world violence. However, on the flip side, if we say this game shouldn't exist, it also opens the door to censoring, say, other perspectives, like a game from the Iraqi side, say you play as one of the Iraqi soldiers, or one critiquing the US military involvement in countries. Again, that is a slope that is kind of slippery. So I think the best thing to do is actually let it release and let people judge it for what it is. And then whether people like it, if it's offensive, if it's trash, or if it's just a Call of Duty thriller shooter, it will flop, and it deserves to flop. And you can do whatever the hell you want. You can criticize it, you can bash it as much as you want. No one's going to stop you because that's your own opinion. However, if it's nuanced, it might spark real discussion. So the short of it is, on my thoughts on this, I think cancelling it or trying to put it down before it actually comes out sets a bad precedent. I think a game like 6 Days in Fallujah can have such a heavy moral control that they give you, and I want the ability to able to basically mess up an entire mission by building up, and then I just do something totally wrong, and it can really make me feel guilty of what I've done. And it's got the visuals as well, like probably the 4K visuals, and it lets you create that scenario unwillingly. For instance, if you're going to basically raid a room where there's a family and you accidentally shoot someone from that family because you just jumped the gun and decided to press the trigger, it can really make you feel like you messed it up, and you're definitely not going to feel your best when you realize that you killed somebody that was innocent. However, on the flip side, saying this, I do have an objection that was coming to me whilst I'm saying this right now. We need to talk about the representation, like a real meaningful representation I'm talking about. 6 Days in Fallujah promised it. The developers claimed they would tell the stories from multiple perspectives, including not just US Marines and soldiers, but also Iraqi civilians. Now, this is a bold, unnecessary goal, especially for a game set during such a controversial and brutal battle. Yet since its early access release, we've seen very little evidence of these perspectives being fully realized. The gameplay footage still seemed to center almost exclusively on the US military side of the story. If 6 Days is truly aiming to be a playable documentary, then it needs to show the human cost of war, not just through stunning visuals that are very gritty, the AI teammates or procedural AI, I feel like it needs to actually show what these lived experiences were like, the conflicting narratives and the ambiguity that defines modern warfare today. And I think that includes the civilians whose lives were shattered by this conflict. It includes the people who caught in the crossfire, innocent people, the ones who had no say in a political chess game being played around them. A game like this has the potential to emotionally impact players in ways that books or films just sometimes can't. Games are interactive, they put responsibility in your hands via a controller. When done right, that interactivity can foster empathy, reflection, and discomfort in a very productive way. But there's a flip side. We humans adapt fast. As players, especially over extended sessions, as most of my people probably watching now, you probably play longer than 2 hours when you have the time. So we get used to systems, we learn how to win, how to optimize, how to succeed within the mechanics the game presents. That could mean that the shocking moment of when we accidentally kill a civilian might only hit hard the first few times. After that, it could easily just become another irritating fail state. And that's the real danger. Not that the players will become violent in real life and become criminals, but they will become emotionally detached within the context of the game. When you normalize the idea of civilian casualties, intentional or accidental, as part of gameplay, you risk trivializing the very real, very traumatic experiences of people who live through these events. No, it won't make players into killers, but it can shape how players emotionally process these scenarios. It can subtly influence how we think about war, accountability, and responsibility. That's a troubling possibility, and one that the 6 Days of Fallujah developers need to reckon with. While the game won't let you commit a war crime, the real debate still stands on whether creating, sanitizing a real-world tragedy for profit is a moral misdemeanor, as some look at it. Some see it also as a bold attempt to depict Fallujah's intensity with authentic testimonies. Others, including Iraqi survivors and veterans, view it as a tasteless commodification of trauma, risking a narrative that could gloss over civilians and veterans' suffering. Iraqis like Hussein, who asks, how would you feel if you saw a game about a tragedy that impacted your family, your people? The pain is truly real. There is no doubt about it. So does artistic freedom justify revisiting a painful part in history, or does it trivialize a tragedy still felt by many? And it begs the question, is the potential release in 2026 of 6 Days in Fallujah going to be the right choice? That's a question with no easy answer. But here's my favourite part of the video, and that's asking you my views. What's your thought on this? Do you think artistic freedom can overstep its boundaries? Do you think 6 Days in Fallujah should just be shelved like it was done before? Or if it does come out in 2026, what would you like the game to do? What are your expectations and your hopes for? Let me know in the comments down below. Hit that bell notification for more. Subscribe, and please give this video a like. It helps more than you know. I appreciate it. But this is me for now, and thank you so much for tuning in. Chickadeus signing out. Peace.